Hello and welcome on into the Ordo Grigio. Today we're going to be painting a Plague Marine from the Dornian Heresy alternative Warhammer 40k universe. Originally I was going to be painting the model you can see here, however when I was placing him in the Games Workshop miniature holder, this happened.
Oh, fuck me.
So, as you can tell, we were off to a great start. However, I do have about a 400 point army built up. So, we proceeded with the new model. To get this to a nice and easy tabletop standard, the first thing we're going to be using is the Army Painter Speed Paint Blood Red. And with this, we're going to cover the entirety of the armor plating. Now, it has quite a strange consistency for a paint, because it's a speed paint, I guess, where you actually want to load your brush quite heavily and apply that to the armor panels, working one panel at a time. You can see here I'm using an Army Painter Monster brush, as I finally get that in zoom. And I'm just going to proceed working my way through the panels one by one, starting at the right leg. For those not into weird parts of the internet, the Dornian Heresy is an alternate 40k history in which the traitor legions and loyalist legions are flipped. So rather than being a Death Guard Plague Marine, what we're actually going to be doing is a Blood Angels Plague Marine. So it is worth noting that this is a 3D printed model that I have printed on my Anycubic Photon Mono 4K. It is a combination of two different kits. One of them is a disgustingly resilient Space Marine set, and the other is a Raven Guard jump pack, which has resulted in Raven Guard symbols on the side of the jump pack. However, it's my models, I'm going to print what I want. So you can see me tracing along, working armor panel by armor panel, making sure to get in all the recesses, as with the zenithal prime that I've done using my airbrush, any gaps or bits you miss will come through very grey, which you will see later on as I'm painting. I do notice a few bits I've missed and I go in and touch them up. Whilst working around the model, I'm trying to be as neat as I can, though I am using a fairly large brush for this kind of work because I want the coverage. I'm just trying to get as little paint on other areas as possible, because one of the quirks with the Army Painter Speed Paint range is when you go back over them with a thin paint consistency, they do tend to reactivate and bleed through into the layer of paint you're painting. Once we've covered all the armor panels, we can see that it looks a little something like this, and can set it aside to dry. The next paint we're going to apply is Army Painter Speed Paint Gravelord Grey, and this is going to go on the casing of the bolter. Again, applied in the same controlled fashion, making sure we don't overspill into areas that we don't want any paint. The next step from here then is to take the Citadel Paint Pink Horror, and with this we're going to be going for all the fleshy parts, such as outgrowing tentacles, weird knee growths, and the little tentacle that is holding the grenade on his side, as well as the bulge coming out of his shoulder pad. Now, when applying the Citadel acrylic, I am using a palette where I'm taking a small amount of paint, applying it to the palette, and then thinning it down to a cream / gone off milk texture, just hopefully without the lumps. I have now also switched to the Citadel layer brush so that I can have finer control and get onto the smaller details. The next step is to paint the metallics on the model, so we are going to use Citadel's Lead Belcher. Unlike the pink horror we used previously, we're not going to thin this down as much as I want a bit more opacity and finer control. So it is pretty much straight out the pot with a dampened brush. We're going to start off on the bolter, making sure to catch the magazine, the stock, and the barrel of the weapon. Then we're going to move on to the casing of the grenade, which holds the explosive charge. Making sure we go all the way around and underneath, as well as including the attachment point where it attaches to the shaft. And paint over the 3 symbols of Nurgle on there. Then once the easy metallics are painted, I then move on to the armor trim. Now, Plague Marines tend to use older versions of power armor, normally around the Mark III, Mark IV, similar to Iron Warriors. So they do have the metallic banding that goes around the edges of armor plates, where the key, I guess if you want to call it that, is taking your time, moving nice and slowly, using the edge of that brush to just catch the raised surface, as it is quite a well designed model, and making sure you just go across it. Now you may find it easier to swap out to a smaller brush. As it progressed, I did swap out to, I think it's a Citadel detail brush, which is just my go-to for small highlights and tiny finicky parts that would otherwise make me want to launch the model across the room. It's worth noting here that this is quite a slow part of the painting process, as we are dealing with quite fine details. However, missing this step, especially with the banded armour of the Plague Marine, does detract quite a lot from the model and make it look quite flat. Whereas if you can go around, make sure you get all these bits of banding, pick them out with a nice metallic, it'll really help the model pop. And it's quite an easy win, if that's what you want to call it. Now, I think in total it took around about the same time to do all the base metallics on this model as it did to paint all the armour red right at the beginning, including doing the metallic flies on the left knee and the chest, as well as going back in and doing the trim on the shoulder pads. Also, as I was doing the trim on the shoulder pads, you can see that it has reactivated the speed paint where I've gone over the lines and added quite a reddish tinge and taken that metallic sheen out. Now, Nurgle don't tend to have very shiny metallics, however they don't have red metallics. So let it dry and then just go back over it again to bring out that solid steel colour. Now the final few steps of the metallics is to get into those veins on the turbines of the jump pack. I rotate the model round, trying to get in all those nooks and crannies, just to get a nice solid metallic, before flipping the model over, getting the jets, I guess they'd be called, at the bottom. And it's at this point I realised that I hadn't done the chainmail that was underneath the loincloth, and I go in and get that done as well. Speaking of loincloths, next up we're going to use Citadel's Screamer Pink, again thinned down to a milky, creamy consistency for the front of the loincloth, making sure we get plenty on our brush, and then wiping it off to maintain control, just getting in there, making sure we get good coverage and a nice solid colour so that it stands out amongst all the other reddy colours. Next is a quick use of Rakarth flesh, again thinned down to that milky consistency where we're just going to catch the piping up on the right shoulder pad Unlike the metallics, where we wanted to go back in and catch any bleed through from the red paint, we're actually going to let it happen here to give us a bit of visual diversity. Next, we're going to grab Steel Legion Drab from Citadel, again thinned down quite a bit, and just pick out that shaft of the grenade. Then we're going to grab onto Liberator Gold and go back in and catch the 3 skull symbols on the grenade and the 2 flies, one on the torso and one on the knee, just to bring out a bit of a brassy colour, though at this stage it will appear quite bright. With the Liberator Gold applied to the model, that is it for basic Tabletop standard. Now, the main thing about Tabletop is everything that should have a colour has a colour, and it's nice and clean with no obvious mistakes. With that said, we'll end the video here. However, I did proceed to do the base and bring this up to what I would consider Tabletop Plus, with some washes, highlights, somewhere in between a guardsman and a Space Marine captain in quality. So we'll leave off here. I'll say thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll join us next time for taking this Plague Marine Raptor to the next level.